In today's lesson, we are going to look at something called cellular respiration. And pretty much today what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at a simplified look at cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration pretty much is what we call pretty much the opposite reaction to photosynthesis. Right? So you should already know about photosynthesis. Now, the opposite of cellular respiration is pretty much the way organisms actually transfer the chemical energy, right, from glucose, right, in the foods that they eat into ATP, right? And this process is what is known as cellular respiration. There are two types of cellular respiration, one of them being aerobic cellular respiration, and the second one being anaerobic cellular respiration. Now, aerobic cellular respiration requires oxygen, and in turn, using oxygen, it produces a large amount of energy, while anaerobic doesn't use oxygen and it produces a little amount of energy. Now, the molecules that we're going to be referring to with regards to energy, so when we're referring to energy, we are really referring to a molecule called ATP, and I've already made a video on ATP, so go back and check that out if you need to understand ATP. Now, the thing is, with organisms just like us, humans, we heavily rely on aerobic cellular respiration because it produces the largest amount of energy. It will produce the largest amount of ATP. Let's look at aerobic cellular respiration. As we said before, this requires oxygen. So we need oxygen, and in turn, we are going to produce a lot of energy, or as we say, a great amount of ATP. Now, aerobic cellular respiration, pretty much it's a two-stage process. The first stage being known as glycolysis. The second stage is known as oxidative respiration. Now, there's a great deal of chemistry that's involved with both of these reactions, but as I said before, this is going to be a simplified version of, or a simplified look at cellular respiration. Now, glycolysis itself is a series of pretty much 10 enzyme catalyzed reactions that actually occur pretty much in the cytoplasm of a cell. Right? So what happens with glycolysis, right? With glycolysis, glucose, right, being C6H12O6, ultimately gets broken down into two molecules of what we call pyruvate. And notice now the formula here. And we're going to say pyruvate. And so notice this is exactly half. So we're going to break down one molecule of glucose into two pyruvate. And at the same time, we are going to produce two molecules of ATP in return. Now, the reactions of glycolysis is what we refer to as being an exergonic. Right? It's an exergonic reaction. Now, what does exergonic reaction mean? It means that it's releasing energy. Now, some of the released energy, some of the energy that is actually released is actually captured. Right? So the energy that's been stored in the glucose ends up getting released when we break this down into the 2-pyruvate. And that energy that gets released from glucose gets put into the 2 molecules of ATP. So now this formation of ATP is now what we refer to as an endergonic reaction. Now we're thinking, well, how can we have both exergonic and endergonic? Well, it's exergonic because the energy that is being stored in the glucose gets released. It's endergonic because that energy gets stored into 2 ATP. And really what happens is the following. Think of it this way. We've got the ADP molecule, adenosine diphosphate, meaning 2 phosphates. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach one more phosphate ion to form that molecule of ATP. And another way I'd like to show it is, think of it this way. I'm going to draw it as such. Picture it being kind of like a capsule, right? So we've got the opening of the capsule. And in this capsule, pretty much, we have the A and then the 2 P's, right? So the diphosphate, right? This is what we call ADP. So what we're going to do now is we are going to attach the 3rd phosphate, but not until we package it with the energy, right, that was released by glucose. So the energy that was released by glucose, exergonic, right, as we said, exergonic, released by glucose, gets stored into ADP molecules, but it gets put in there and then it gets capped, right? It gets capped to form, and please excuse the inaccuracy, it's just an analogy of this capsule here, this ATP, 3 phosphates, that has now all this energy that's stored within here. So that energy that's being stored in there can actually get used. Now, in return, pretty much, let's look at what the actual reaction looks like. So the actual reaction looks as follows. We have pretty much glucose, C6H12O6, undergoes a breakdown within the cytoplasm of a cell, and this is what we're referring to as glycolysis, to form 2 molecules of pyruvate. And in return, what happens is we've got 2 molecules of ADP, right, that pretty much package, right, that energy that was released from glucose to form 2 molecules of ATP. So in return, so to sum it up, the process of glycolysis is as such. Occurs in the cytoplasm. It breaks glucose down into 2-pyruvate and forms 2 molecules of ATP that can be used when the time comes. So now the 2 molecules of pyruvate that was formed in glycolysis, they're transported into the matrix ultimately, right? So what's going to happen is this process could stop right here. However, we keep breathing oxygen, and as we keep breathing oxygen, this molecule will actually make its way into what we call the matrix of the mitochondria. And if you remember my analogy, if you watch my video, on the parts of the cell, or you'll pretty much hear this from any other teacher with regards to the mitochondria. The mitochondria is referred to as the powerhouse of the cell. And pretty much here is, and as we said, this in conjunction with oxygen will allow us to create the greatest amount of ATP. Now, that's that next step that we were talking about earlier on here when we refer to as oxidative cellular respiration, which we're going to talk about next. We are going to look at the second stage of aerobic cellular respiration, and that being oxidative respiration. So as we said earlier, this is really what's happening. In glycolysis, glucose will break down, break down into 2 molecules of pyruvate, creating 2 molecules of ATP. Now, with continual breathing in, right? So we breathe in oxygen, organisms breathe in oxygen, they take in that oxygen, and they undergo what we call this oxidative cellular respiration. And what happens is these 2 pyruvate will enter into the matrix of the mitochondria, provided that there is oxygen present. Another way in which you will see books referred to as oxidative respiration is as the Kreb Cycle. And it's pretty much in honor of Hans Kreb, who was a biochemist that actually was the one who actually discovered this reaction. Now, in turn, this oxidative cellular respiration will produce the greatest amount of ATP. In fact, this process alone, this Kreb cycle, as I'm going to be referring to it instead of oxidative respiration, is going to produce up to 34 molecules of ATP. And this is actually done within the mitochondria. And that's why we refer to as mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, because it's within the mitochondria that we produce the most amount of ATP. So let's look at the Krebs cycle. So as we've said before, we had 2 molecules of pyruvate. Right? So here we have the 2 pyruvate that have been produced when we broke down glucose in the glycolysis step. Now, remember, we're breathing in oxygen, right? And in fact, it works out to about 6 molecules of oxygen. And it's going to undergo the Krebs or oxidative respiration, which is the Krebs cycle, and in return, it's going to form carbon dioxide, which is a waste product by us, right? We breathe that out, as well as water. And for argument's sake, when dealing with a chemical reaction, I like to keep things balanced, and this is what it's going to form. It's going to form 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, right? Which is released into the environment as a waste product. We produce water, right? As well as plus 34 ATP. And this part isn't really balanced, isn't part of the chemical reaction. It is, but it's the energy aspect. So we're not looking for it on both sides when balancing it. So what happens is, in order to form these 34 ATP, well, again, the energy that is available, right, gets stored into 34 molecules of ADP. And what we have is we're going to have 34 phosphate ions that are going to capsule that energy, right? That it's going to store that energy. Remember, if you're watching earlier on in the video, right, when we were referred to as ADP, storing this energy and then capsuling it, right? Like covering up, putting a cap on it to form this molecule of ATP that has the energy actually stored in it. So here what we have is the reaction of oxidative respiration, or as we said, the actual Krebs cycle. right? Now, the overall process, let's look at the overall process, right? So overall, and this is overall aerobic cellular respiration reaction, right? So we're going to look at the overall, right? Everything in turn, right? We started off with glucose, right? So we started off with glucose. And what else did we need? Well, we needed oxygen, 6 molecules of oxygen. And in return, we form 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and a total of 36 molecules of ATP. And this is the overall, this is everything put together. This is pretty much glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, or oxidative respiration, all put together, right? So this whole process starts off in the cytoplasm and then enters into the mitochondria. And before I kind of draw that analogy, what I do want you to make note of is the following. Look at the following reaction that I'm going to show you right now. Look at the following reaction. So let's keep this going here. Let's keep this reaction going. But watch the following reaction that I'm going to show you. All right, so we're going to draw light. And remember, it's light energy. Plus, and there's a reason why I'm drawing in green. All right. Produces C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Here's the reaction. Look at it really carefully. This is another chemical reaction, right? And as if you've made the I guess the connection is, well, this is photosynthesis that you should have already seen. This is photosynthesis. Notice that photosynthesis that occurs in what we call autotroph organisms, right? These are plants, right? They undergo photosynthesis because, well, they cannot feed themselves, right? But other organisms, which are referred to as heterotrophs, right? These are other feeders, right? They undergo aerobic cellular respiration, right? So not just organisms, right? And not just heterotrophs, but autotrophs as well. Autotrophs are the only ones that will undergo this. All right? They're the only ones that will undergo this. However, both autotrophs and heterotrophs need to go through this. Remember, a plant needs to go through cellular respiration because, well, where are they going to get the energy that they require for their day-to-day activity? Right? And one way I like to compare photosynthesis and cellular respiration in plants is as such. Plants will do the shopping during the day. They're going to get all the food that they need, right? So they're going to produce as much glucose as possible while the sun is out. And then once the sun is gone and it's nighttime, then the plants are going to go into their storage of glucose to actually break down that glucose, right, with oxygen present to actually produce the energy that they need for when they need to grow and undergo whatever processes they require that energy to be used. Now, what I want to do is I want to go and show you a simplified diagram of pretty much glycolysis. So here we're going to have our cell, right, and we're going to have our nucleus of the cell, and we are going to draw our mitochondria here. So this is our mitochondria. So what's going to happen is the following. Plants are going to take in, it looks like kind of like a face with one eye, but this is a cell, and this being the nucleus, and this being pretty much the mitochondria. All right, sorry for the messy writing, but anyhow, glucose is going to enter. Right, glucose is going to enter into the cytoplasm area, and glucose is going to break down into the two molecules of pyruvate. And this is glycolysis. And at the same time, it's going to form 2 ATP. Now, if oxygen is present, right? So if oxygen is present, these molecules of pyruvate is going to enter into the mitochondria, where it will further break down and produce, right, carbon dioxide, water as waste, and it's going to produce 34 more ATP. So we've got the 2 ATP that was produced during glycolysis, 34 produced during the Kreb cycle or oxidative respiration, to give us a total of 36 molecules of ATP. And this is when oxygen is present. This is during aerobic cellular respiration.